So I was in Costco yesterday, and there is a certain cheese that does not have a hechsher. It's never kosher. It's like a cream cheese, and I tasted it one time at someone's house, and it's really, really good. It has herbs in it and all kinds of things. And then for the rest of my days, I've been thinking about, wow, couldn't that be one day? Couldn't that be kosher? If only that was kosher, I would buy it, And it's never kosher. I'm going to tell you what it is in a minute. But it reminds me of my childhood. Do you remember those cookies, the sandwich cookies with the cream between them, but it has the cherry filling in the middle? They were made by Peak Frians.
Yes.
Well, we never could have them in my house because they never had a hechsher on them. They were never kosher. And I'd go to other people's houses, other kids that didn't have kosher homes, and I would eat those there when my father wouldn't see me eat them. The other thing was, remember the marshmallow cookies with the jam in between the two layers of marshmallow?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
So
Yes.
many years ago, they made those sandwich marshmallow cookies by a company, and they make them kosher. Well, if you live long enough, you get to see everything. First of all, Dare, the company Dare Cookies, it now has a hechsher. It's kosher. My whole childhood growing up, we could never have them. But there is a company, do you know the Compliments brand by whoever carries it, Metro, whatever it is? They are carrying those sandwich cookies with the cream and the jam in the middle with a hechsher. So now you can buy them. So I went and I bought a box. And lo and behold, they're not as good as I remember.
Nothing
They
ever
never
is.
are. They
Yeah.
never are.
So halacha and cooking, somebody asked about that. I'll give you an example. The cheese that I was talking about, that cream cheese, is called beurre-sang. Beurre-sang.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that.
All
Yeah,
right.
I've wanted to taste that too.
All right. Well, it's very, very good. But what I will tell you is, when I was in Costco, above the beurre-sang was a different beurre-sang. There was a tub of a beurre-sang cheese that was non-dairy. No dairy in it. It's like, I guess, fake cream cheese with herbs in it, right? Maybe it's tofu. I didn't even look. All I know is on the side of the package, it said kosher, it's core, and it's parv.
Wow.
And it's parv. So I grab a tub and I take it, and I'm so excited, and I get it home. I haven't tasted it yet. Well, what I'm telling you, what I thought about is this. I saw a recipe years ago, and I said, we can't make that. It was that you take chicken, like a chicken breast, and you mix cream cheese with some mayonnaise or some
yeah.
an egg if you want. You make, and you roll the chicken. You mish it in the cream cheese, which we can't do, of course. And after you mix the chicken in the cream cheese, you can take it then and you could either dip it in scallions, or you could dip it in breadcrumbs or whatever it is, and you bake it. Now I can try it. I could try it. But if you were going to make that at home, you need to keep the tub on the counter. So if anybody comes into your house, they see what it is that you're using, because they'll go, what, you're making chicken and cream cheese? So if they see the tub and they see that it has a parv on it, then at least they'll know that you're following Jewish law. So that's the idea of marit ayin. There's a joke about marit ayin. This guy kept on saying, in Yiddish, he kept saying, I don't do this because of Maris Ayin. I don't do this because of Maris Ayin. And someone said, who's this guy Morris Ayin? So I think that what happens is we're all afraid of this guy named Morris. And this guy named Morris was someone that I alluded to a while back when I talked about the issue of going to Dairy Queen. Let's say you wanted a plain ice cream in a cup, and you knew that Dairy Queen was kosher, and you want to have it only on Shabbat on a summer's day. And you made arrangements with the person in the Dairy Queen, and you said, I want to prepay you in advance. I want to pay for it, so I shouldn't owe you money. I'll give you $50 and you'll take it off every time I come in. You'll buy it. But I want to be able to come in on Shabbat. I can't pay for it on Shabbat. So if I come in and I get an ice cream for you on Shabbat, you'll know to deduct it yourself off of the amount that I gave you in advance. Now, honestly, we can't do that because of Morris. Morris will tell on you. Who's Morris? Rochama, I was talking about Marit Ayin, Maris Ayin. and someone kept on saying Marasayan. They said, who's Morris? So the idea is that how the perception is and what the perception is by the things that you do and the way you behave and the way you act is important, because that's how we came to some of the modern rituals of halacha, leniencies, how we came to many of the leniencies that we have today. Light bulbs, for instance, that whole leniency about having a timer that you set in motion before Shabbat that turns it off and on was allowed, because why? The rabbi said we hold our hands up in the air. We can't stop people from doing it. People are already doing it. Well, that's a good reason. Maybe we need to round up everybody and say we're going to break a lot of rules, and the rabbis will say, since they're already breaking them, it doesn't always work quite that way. But there's different reasonings for things that we do. And last week, we started touching on zooming for a Seder, and I said there's a tshuva by the Moroccan rabbis, which we'll go over again just very quickly, because it's something to think about, and zooming for a Megillah, Esther reading, and the leniencies. And there's a rabbinic prohibition that when you go by a camera, like a video camera that is recording, not just a video camera where there's a man sitting there watching, but it's hooked up to a recording. And on that video camera, there's an image being captured. The image is being captured on the screen. And one of our rabbis said, and it was Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, he said, well, it's not really being captured. It's an image, and it's like there's a shinui to it, and it's being digitally changed. And you're not standing in front of the camera and posing on Shabbat. You're just walking by it. I don't care if the camera's there. If it happens to capture me, it's not my fault. As far as I'm concerned, I would even rather that the camera wasn't even there, but because it's there, it's digitally rearranging the numbers, but I'm not asking to do it. So in concept, he said, the same leniency should apply to video monitors as would apply to a water meter. All right, so now I have your attention. A water meter. What are they talking about? Well, in homes, if you go and you see people coming to check your meter, now they do it without even asking. They just come around your house with this electronic gauge and check your water meter, how much water you're using, and that's how they bill you accordingly, And in Israel, they certainly have water meters, and these things are turning all the time. They're going around in a circle. The more water you use, you're making that thing turn. When you open the faucet, you're causing that meter to turn. It's interesting. But are you concerned with making it turn when you turn on the water faucet? No, you're turning it on to water, even cold water. Forget about hot water. Forget about the leniencies of a dud shemesh and free hot water that is being heated by the sun, bachama, above the building, and whether or not that's allowed or not, that's a whole separate issue. That could be allowed, it could not be allowed. Some people say that maybe the water from the dud shemesh on Friday before it was Shabbat, you forgot that it was a cold day, it was cloudy, and you forgot to turn off the switch to the water heater so that it would only be heated by the sun. Now you're using it, you're causing it to turn on. There's all kinds of different issues with those things. But the issue about making a water, those numbers are changing. That thing is turning all the time when you're using water. But the whole idea is that that's not your concern, it's not your purpose. In fact, if I didn't tell you that was happening, then that would be called b'di'eved. In b'di'eved, you turn on the faucet, the water comes out, and it's something you're not concerned with. It was like the idea of the psik reisha de lo nicha. When I said psik reisha, the man who said, I want to make a toy for his son on Shabbat, I said it many, many times, and he says, I'll cut off the chicken's head for my child and give him a toy to play with the chicken head. He didn't intend to kill the chicken, but he violated Shabbat by killing the chicken. So there's no objection to writing God's name on an electronic screen, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says, even though you are going to erase it, because it's only the result of the electromagnetic forces. Wow. So you see, Rav Shlomo was already thinking in modern terms because there's no reference in the Gemara and the Talmud to electromagnetic forces. So all of a sudden, the modern rabbis are starting to think outside the box. And he said, it follows a new line of reasoning. He says, what would happen if on Shabbos you took a large number of candles and you arranged all the candles on a table in the dark? It's dark, you can't see how you're arranging them, but you arrange them and you spelled out a word. You arrange the candles to spell out a word, any word. He said, you are guilty of lighting a fire on Shabbos, but the prohibition of writing on Shabbos, they're just dots. He's using the idea of computer language. You know, they used to talk about dot matrix systems in the old days. Before we had what we have today, the systems were dot matrix. And he said, it's just being dots on a page. You're not intentionally trying to make dots. When you spell out a word, you're creating these dots. And he said the spelling of the word is just an illusion of the pixels on the screen. Do you remember? Doesn't happen so much with our TVs today because I guess they're LCD or they're whatever it is, plasma, whatever. We have all these new technologies. But a while back when they first came out with digital TVs, before when TVs had a back, they were this thick and you had to keep them 3 feet from the wall because you had to have a vent and they were heavy and they weighed 1,000,000 pounds. Today you pick it up with 2 fingers, a television, and you hang it on the wall like a picture, but they're skinny and they're flat. Well, the first digital TVs, sometimes when they'd start to get old, parts of the screen would go black on you because pixels would break up and wear out on it. And all of a sudden you'd have a little section of the screen that wasn't clear. Today, technology is even more advanced. But what Rav Shlomo Zalman is saying, he said that he's responding differently to 3 different independent explanations, that there are different reasons for why a video monitor is not a problem, why it's not problematic on Shabbos. One of the most popular handbooks on Hilchot Shabbat is a set of books which I was very lucky to acquire from Rabbi Shaim. I never in my life been proud of having extra books that I need, like I'm a junk collector, but I like books. But there's a set of books called Shmirat Shabbat Kehilchata. And the third edition of the publication compares the difference. In each edition leading up to the third edition, they became thicker as they went along. The books got thicker and thicker and thicker. And each edition became more and more strict. The earlier ones weren't so strict. The second edition became more stricter, and the third one became even more strict. So as they're becoming stricter, they're becoming thicker and thicker and thicker with more reasons, which appeared that weren't in the earlier editions. So the first version of Shmirat Shabbat Kehilchata was a very, very thin set of books. So regarding that, we've seen rabbis that argue. We've talked about rabbis arguing and discussing all the time different opinions and how they even sometimes do a 180. They're giving you they write books called Sheilot Utshuvot, and they're giving you an opinion on something, and you think they're leading towards a leniency the whole time that they're answering the question that was written to them, and at the end of the tshuva, they stick it to you. They give you a 180, and they turn around and they reverse their whole decision to what you were thinking is going to go, and they take a strict opinion and they go, but no way. And they often do it delicately by saying, in my humble opinion, and then they say, the rabbis will frown upon you, or the rabbis won't smile upon you. Those are all very polite ways of saying you shouldn't do it. Here's an example. Going back to Rambam, so we're 13th century, he wrote in the Mishnah Torah. Do you know anything about the Mishnah Torah? Mishnah Torah, written by Rambam, was his way of codifying the whole Talmud into a small set of books. So instead of having this, you have this. And he said, here's the laws, here's the rules, follow my laws, it's easy. You don't need the Talmud, you don't need the Gemara. It's not written for lay people. There was no such thing as Daf Yomi. It was all written in ancient Aramaic and Gemaric language that most people couldn't understand. And there are things in there that they don't even want you to read. There's all kinds of mysticism in there. There's things about if you have a bad dream, you should take the ashes of a black cat and sprinkle it around your bed. Things that we don't do today. There's all kinds of things in the Gemara. They insult each other. The rabbis are insulting each other. They call each other fatso in the Gemara. The things that they say and the language that they say is absurd for rabbis, this kind of behavior. So the Mishnah Torah, Rambam said, here's a nice clean set of books. It tells you what to do. Follow this. If you follow this, you don't need anything else. So other rabbis were looking at this and saying, he's a heretic telling us not to study Talmud and Gemara. Take the Mishnah Torah and burn them. Burn them, put them on the bonfire and get rid of them. Don't follow them. Today we read Mishnah Torah and we take it in we regard it very highly. But there was a time when it wasn't so ay. But yet he wrote in his set of books that an interesting thought. He said, if you find tzitzit in the marketplace, you're walking through, I don't know, the Carmel market in Tel Aviv, and you're walking along, it's a busy marketplace, and you look down the ground and you see a set of 4 threads on the ground, and you bend over, you pick it up. You realize that it's a set of fringes, a set of tzitzit that someone lost. Someone lost these tzitzit. And you don't know who the original owner is. You look around this way, you look around that way. Excuse me, mister, are these yours? Excuse me, ma'am, did you drop these? You're going to walk around to everybody in the marketplace and ask them if they dropped a set of tzitzit. So you have no idea who spun the threads and whether or not those threads that look like they could be used for tzitzit were made in the first place for the performance of a mitzvah. For all you know, they were made by an Asian person on the 3rd floor above a Chinese restaurant who said, I saw this thing. You know what? I was on the subway at the beginning of COVID. I was coming back from downtown from a hospital. And I saw something that really sickened me. It disgusted me, but I didn't have the guts to say anything because I'm afraid of people today. And I saw a person of color, and it shouldn't matter that they're a person of color. I'm saying it for a purpose, a reason, because, and we'll talk more about that, but they were wearing a talit around them. They were wearing it like it was a woman, first of all, and she was wearing, not that a woman can't wear a talit. You see, today we see how things change, that this would have been back, but she's wearing it like a scarf, like around her neck, like to keep her warm, like it's a fashion statement, like she could have got it at Value Village. Somebody had a bar mitzvah and they discard everything. Have you ever been in that store? Go in there and you can find chumashim, you can find siddurim, you can find holy Judaic articles and artifacts in there and things that are being treated badly, mezuzot, not cluffs, but people buy mezuzot cases. They think it's like a fashion statement. There's no cluff inside. It's not even a kosher mezuzah because it's just a case, but they hang it on their walls because they saw their friend who's Jewish had one. I want to have one too. That's not the purpose of the thing. But the thing is we don't know why these fringes were made and how they were made and who they were made by. So even though they don't belong to you, you cannot use them for a mitzvah. You can't say, you know what? Oh, I found these tzitzit on the ground. I don't know who they belong to. I'm going to take them and I'm going to tie them up onto my tallis that, the tzitzit could be replaced already. They're old. So I'll put them on there and I'll use them. So in the south of France, the rabbis asked Rambam, they asked him why he paskined, why he made a ruling in the way that they sent him a letter. They said, Rabbi, you are correct that they belong to the finder. You're right that the tzitzit belong to the person who found them. But why did you say that they can't be used for the mitzvah of tzitzit? It's obvious what they are. Why would anyone tie tzitzit if it wasn't for the purpose of the mitzvah? Why did you disqualify them for being used on my talit. And the Rambam wrote back, he said, "You are right, and I made a mistake. Kindly correct the manuscripts that you have, and you may own them and use them for the purpose of for the mitzvah of tzitzit." Wow. Rambam writes, "You're right, I made a mistake." How often does that happen? From Gedolim it can happen, but the average person doesn't want to say that. The Gra, the Vilna Gaon, known as the Gra to us, Rav Eliyahu ben Shlomo Zalman. Does anybody know that? That was his name. He wrote to the Rambam and he said, "Why did you listen to the rabbis of France? What did you listen to them for?" See a whole thing he started? He said, "You were correct the first time. When you wrote that they couldn't be used for the purpose of the mitzvah of filling for tzitzit, those rabbis that wrote to you from France, they were wrong." And the Gra, in his commentary in the Shulchan Aruch, says that the Rambam was right the first time around. So even a rabbi who does a 180 for a leniency or for a strict opinion is sometimes regarded as, what do they know? I find it fascinating. So when a great rabbi changes his mind and doesn't have the right to erase his first opinion, even with his second opinion, it creates what we call a machloket. It creates a disagreement. It creates disharmony. Is that a word? I don't know, but it's unharmonious. And the two opinions of the Rambam, now you have to decide, which one would you follow? Would you follow the first opinion when he said, don't use them? Would you follow the second opinion when the rabbis of France wrote to him and said it's ridiculous? It's obvious to anyone who found tzitzit on the ground that they're used for tzitzit, for a mitzvah. So of course you can use them for tzitzit. And for the Rambam to say, I changed my mind, you are right, do we follow that opinion? Which one do we follow? The Gra, the Vilna Gaon, he embraced the first opinion of the Rambam. We know. The Shulchan Aruch embraced the second opinion. So the first opinion doesn't go away. It doesn't just vanish. There was an opinion. But because he changed his mind, if the information that he was given was found to be incorrect, if it was found to be wrong, and the facts were wrong, then the conclusion is really unacceptable. But if the facts didn't change, if the facts were the same, and the rabbi's authority doesn't cancel out the first opinion, then there's a reason to possibly follow the first opinion. So you see, there could be a change of mind in a community or in Rabbeim or in modern poskim if they receive more knowledge that could change the opinion of the Gedolim. So when these Gedolim, these Sephardic rabbis last year wrote a tshuva and signed it, and they said that Leil HaSeder, if you want to Zoom with your family so that the grandchildren can see their grandparents, that's a maverick thing to do. To allow electronics by the Orthodox rabbinate of the Sephardic community on Yom Tov. That's pioneering. That's really unbelievable. I'm not talking about I'm talking about rabbis that hats are bigger than my television set. And they are puskening that was okay, but they were very careful. And we'll talk about their language. They were very careful to say, it's only for this time. Unfortunately, I'm speaking in a modern sense, if I allow you to do something once, you're going to do it all the time. Well, there's a great need. This year, the need is a little different than it was last year, but they did say it was okay once, and since they said it, that's why the Ashkenazi Rabbanim said, no way. They said, no way, we're not opening that up. You know why? Because the Ashkenazi rabbis already knew that those that want to do it are going to do it anyway. So why do I have to give you permission? What do I need to give you permission for? I don't have to tell you that coffee in Starbucks, the Starbucks doesn't have a sign on the outside that says COR, and you're only going in to have a coffee in a paper cup. You can have a coffee. I don't have to tell you that. I don't have to write a tshuva. You know it. So once I give you permission to do something, you're going to do it all the time. You know, here's a very interesting in Sheilot Utshuvot by a rabbi named Rav Moshe Sternbach. Rav Moshe Sternbach is a Haredi rabbi who serves as the vice president of the rabbinical court and the Ravad of the Eidah HaCharedi in Yerushalayim. And he resides in Har Nof. Where else?
Hi. No, we're just dozing listening.
Well, doesn't know she's unmuted. It's okay. So he lives in Har Nof, where he is the rabbi of the local Grash synagogue, the Vilna Gaon Shul, they call it, named after the Vilna Gaon, of course, who he happens to be a direct descendant of. So you got to hear this, because this is the language that they used, and I'm just reading to you from it. Do you know how some books today are being banned from schools because of language, because of political culture, and because they're politically incorrect? And we'll say rightfully so. But I want to share this with you. In the Sheilot Shuvot, Rav Moshe Sternbach was asked about houses where the door is always locked for security reasons. Only if someone knocks and the security guard happens to hear the knock at the door. By the way, I'm talking about South Africa. I'm talking about in South Africa. So he's being asked this question from somebody who lives in South Africa. I'm prefacing it by saying that so you'll understand the language. He knocks, hears knocking at the door, and he looks at the monitor. And if he recognizes them as being light-skinned and not dark-skinned, that's what it says. Don't forget, Rav Sternbach was the first rabbi who opposed recognizing the Ethiopian Jews as being Jews. So when I went to, what was it, many years ago, it was around 2001, after the second operation, when Ethiopian Jews were saved in Yerushalayim, Mevaseret Zion. I went to Mevaseret Zion to visit the absorption center of the Ethiopian Jews and how they were trying to be acclimatized to society so that they can fit in and they can be part. But they were widely accepted as Jews, but there were some people that were saying, you know what, they were more like Noachide Jews. They really didn't know about all of our Hilchot, so they should have to go through a conversion process. We're not going to just recognize them as Jews. Most people didn't agree with this, but Rav Sternbach, he completely opposed the whole idea. So that's why the language in the tshuva. What he says is, the security guard is violating Shabbat. Since you would suffer outside because you can't get in, we should be lenient. He's talking about if a non-Jewish owner of the building, the person who owns the building is not Jewish, and the person who hires the non-Jewish security guard to open the door on Shabbat for you. So therefore, he's not opening the door because you knocked. He's opening the door because his boss told him, if you see somebody that you recognize, open the door. He was given those instructions first, not because you knocked. So what he's doing is he's only doing what his non-Jewish employer told him to do, what he directed him to do. And therefore, he said there's no problem. So the poskim in general, what I'm trying to get to is the position of the rabbinic authorities are saying that when it comes to video monitors and cameras and all of that technology on Shabbat, because it's not your purpose to care whether or not that camera is there. You're going for a different purpose. And because at the beginning that wasn't your intention, remember we spoke about intentions are very, very important. The leniency, all of it, they have to find leniencies because back in the old days they didn't have to worry about security monitors. There was no such thing. But being kept out of your house, if it was boiling outside that day in South Africa and it was 110 degrees and you're standing out there and you're schwitzing, or it's freezing outside because it's winter and it's below zero and you have a thin coat on and you're freezing because of discomfort and physical and emotional hardship on Shabbos, maybe you're cold, maybe you're hungry, then we always look for leniencies. And by the way, I don't have to tell you this, you already know that. In the case of sickness, we'll talk about that in medical ethics one day, but in the case of sickness, everything overrides Shabbat pretty much anyway. The rabbis had to look at leniencies, by the way, for that too. You know, in the original opinions, they said, if something is life-threatening, then of course you should violate Shabbat, you know, and do it with a shinui, you know, remember, do it with a doctor can write a prescription for you, he'll use his left hand instead of his right hand, maybe he'll use not permanent ink and he'll do it with a pencil. A shinui means to change it, to twist it, to do something that isn't normal, isn't kedarko, isn't the regular way. And that way we do it, but we do it a little bit differently. Well, you know, with Shabbat, and with sicknesses in the original way, they said, if it affects your whole body, every part of you, you know, you're got the flu and you have chills all over the place and you're really, really sick, you can take someone to the hospital. It's the right thing to do. But what about the person who only has a toothache? One area of your body, you can suffer with a toothache. Maybe you can't. Maybe a toothache to you, if it's really bad, is like the end of the world. And you got to get to the emergency, to the dentist to get it looked after right away. So the rabbis later decided it's narishkeit. Whether it's one part of your body or whether it's your whole part of the body, if it's an emergency, it's emergency and you shouldn't wait. So when we talk about how the rabbis come up with these opinions about zooming and shmooming and all these things, I tell you, I know a lot of people in the modern, not in the Haredi movement, but in the modern Orthodox movement that zoomed on Yom Tov last year because it was such a hard year. Everybody was separate. Everybody was saying, you're not in my bubble. I can't see you, bubble schmubble. And I wasn't allowed to be with you. And I didn't see my grandchildren for a year and a half physically. I was only allowed to see them on, like I'm looking at you now, on a FaceTime on a telephone. We lived in this world that all of a sudden, zooming seemed like an answer. But even when the rabbis okayed it and said it's okay, those Sephardic rabbis, they did it, but they did it reluctantly. And they did it by saying things that were utterly technologically impossible. Well, if you turn it on before and you're not activating anything and you're not doing anything and you're not touching it and you're not looking at it and it stays on before Yom Tov, it'll stay on. It doesn't work that way. We know it doesn't work that way. In fact, as I'm talking to you, my little box is lighting up yellow. You know how your box lights up yellow when you talk? That means every time I would be speaking into my Zoom at the table, I'd be causing the light to light up. So they have to find a way to deactivate that too, in other words, to make it right. There's always a way to look at it and say, it really doesn't work. So Ruth Darman says, or could it be that the Sephardic rabbis were going to get together in a large group anyway for the Seder and didn't want to use Zoom because they don't want government to dictate how they practice religion? Well, you know what? They themselves, Ruth, they themselves wouldn't do it. They wouldn't even do it. They'll tell you it's okay to do it. It's like the time that I was in Borough Park on Saturday. Shabbat was ending. For me, I follow Shabbat ends an hour after you lit candles. If you light candles at 6, it ends at 7. Okay. I grew up in Rabbi Kelman's world at Beth Emeth and Chazan Danto's world at Beth Emeth. So in that world, they waited an hour and 10 minutes. Why? Because Rabbi Kelman was from like more Hasidic background. I don't know, Vishnitzer. I think it was a Vishnitzer Chassid from his family way back. But anyway, there was a bit of a Hasidic. They had mayim achronim on the table, and you wash the salt off your hands at the end before Birkat Hamazon, and they had different customs. They used the Kiddush cup for Birkat Hamazon at Suda Shlishit, I remember as a kid. We had different customs, but there was an hour and 10 minutes. A lot of the Hasidim wait an hour and a half. So if you light candles at 6, they don't wait till 7:20, 7:30 before they let Shabbat be finished. So I was standing in the lobby of the hotel, and I want to make Havdalah. They have all the candles set up. It's a Frum hotel called the Park House Hotel in Borough Park. And I walk over and I take the candle and I take wine. I make Havdalah. 100 Hasidim with Streimelech came running over to me, and they're standing around me, listening to me do Havdalah. They want to be Yoitze, my Havdalah. They want to hear my Havdalah. Because if I say Havdalah, for them I ended Shabbos. So in other words, let Marshall be the goy. He can end Shabbos early. We didn't end it early. He ended it early. So, there's something to being a pioneer. But Zoom was allowed by the Sephardic community for 1 year. But what about this year? What about this year? It's not the same this year. They won't write a tshuva allowing it for this year. It will not be allowed. And people are going to say, but last year I didn't only have my children and grandchildren that were in university that were stuck there, but I've also got my great auntie in Israel who's all by herself this year for the Seder. She's all by herself. I can't have her be all by herself. That's not right. We need to connect with her. We need to have her as part of our Seder. So you'll find your own leniency, and you'll say, because it's a tzorech, it's a need, it's a great need, I better attach myself to her through Zoom. People are going to do it anyway. And I'm wondering what's going to happen down the road in, I don't know, my lifetime, the next 50 years, 30 years. I mean, if I live at 20, that'd be great. But let's say the next generation, that will our grandchildren just be able to do whatever they want halachically? I'm not talking about just because they make up their mind, but will the community changes allow for that to happen? Well, we talked about tzorech, a need. You have a sick person in the hospital, and they're not here. They're in they're in Barrie, Ontario, and you don't drive. You don't even have a car, and it's too expensive to take a taxi to Barrie, and you want to visit them, and you want to make a Bikur Cholim visit. Is it okay to pick up the telephone and just call them and see how they're feeling? We do it anyway. But is that good enough? Is that considered a mitzvah? Because now I'm distinguishing between you made a nice phone call to somebody to see how they're doing and fulfilling a mitzvah. There's a mitzvah for Bikur Cholim. So is picking up a phone a mitzvah? Or do we have to be physically present in the room? Why am I talking about this? Who cares? You're going to do it anyway. The reason I'm talking about it is because I want to get to eventually, if I stop talking so much, to Megillat Esther, to what happens if you're not comfortable or you don't want to be in a room with 100 people or 500 people listening to a Megillah. What is allowed? What is the mitzvah? Well, there's a tshuva by Rav Avadia Yosef, since we're already talking about Sephardic poskim, and he said that the whole mitzvah has a source according to the Gemara. Now, do you remember I said last week and the week before, it's not enough for them to just say, I said so you can do. They have to find a source in the Gemara which links to the Torah. Otherwise, you can't just make up different rulings based on the laws. So you got to go in the ways of the Torah. If you visit the sick person in person, you'll have an idea how severe the situation is. Now, I know for a fact, as all of you do here, if you've recently visited someone who's really sick, there's a big difference between being there in person and the calmness that comes over the person when you visit them in person that you cannot bring over a phone. When you're there in person, you can hug them if they need to be hugged. You can calm them because you can see their physical presence. You can see the anguish. You can see pain. You can see suffering. And you can mop their floor for them. That's what the Gemara says. You should mop their floor. You can do things for them. You can physically bring them food. You can go in their home and make them a cup of tea. So there's a difference from the actual physical being there, and just hearing about it on the telephone doesn't give the same impression as actually seeing them. Now, I'm not talking about a situation where you say, yeah, but I can't get there. I gotta phone them. If I don't phone them, it won't happen. I'm talking about a mitzvah. There's a difference between phoning someone or counting it as a mitzvah. If you see them, you'll understand. If you only visit by telephone, you cannot fulfill the mitzvah entirely. Ooh, that's an interesting choice of words by Rav Avadia Yosef. Listen, he says, if you only visit by telephone, you cannot fulfill the mitzvah entirely. Well, he didn't quite say that you haven't fulfilled it a little bit. Is there such a thing as a half a mitzvah? You know what? I wrote on my exam, I had an exam in technology, and he asked a bonus question. I always do the bonus questions because if you don't do the bonus questions, I consider you're a bum. Why? Because the prof is testing you to see, are you someone who's serious? If you just answer the questions and you move on to the next exam, I know that you want the mark, and let's get this over with and let's get going. If you're going to take the time to answer the bonus questions, that means that you want to learn. Because his bonus questions, Rabbi Fink's bonus questions, have 10 parts to them. He asks a question, and he says, and what about this, and how about that, and how about this? And he says, it gives you 5 things to think about in the question, and then the son of a gun says, and I mean that with great endearment because I love him, he says, give me the strict opinion, the lenient opinion, position, and what we paskin today for each one of them. So each bonus question is a 2-hour question. So you're thinking, do I want to invest 4 hours? And I came up with something, and he wrote on it, I think he wrote good. That's the best you're going to get out of Rabbi Fink, good. Rochama, it's better than having something that says Kimat Tov. If you get told Kimat Tov, you know, it's almost good enough, you know what I mean? Kimat Tov. I had a few Kimat Tovs from Louis, from Grisha. When I first started, I first davened a few times. He's not going to lie to you. If I davened and it was okay, and I was learning, he would say, very good. But if it wasn't great, he would say, Kimat Tov. It was almost good. That already is something. You're on your way. So he's opening a door. He's opening a door here for a leniency. And if you're face to face, he says, you will really feel the suffering of the patient. And then he says, I agree with Moshe Feinstein's opinion. Wow, a rabbi's agreeing with another rabbi's opinion. He says, only in a case where you can't go in person, it's better to call on the phone or send a letter. Don't forget, at this time, we didn't have internet. You couldn't send an email or a text message like we do today. Hi, Bubby, how are you feeling? There was no texting. It was send a letter. It got there in 2 weeks, and but only in a case where you can't go in person. Send a letter. Encourage him. Encourage her with the words that you write. The leading Sephardic and Ashkenazi poskim seem to be on the same page here. That's already something. They're on the same page because they don't want to say to you, You know what? If you pick the phone up, it doesn't count. You got to go in person. You'll be on a train and a plane. You'll be traveling. You'll never stop. You'll be going. You won't have time to make challah. You'll be running and going every Friday all day long visiting people because that's all you'll have time to do. You know, you have to phone people too. So he's not quite saying it's exactly the same. But regarding other mitzvot, because remember, we're not talking about just doing it because you want to feel good. It makes you feel good to call them. It makes them feel happy that you phoned, that you cared enough to call. But what about the actual commandment, the fulfillment of the mitzvah? There's other mitzvot. There's a mitzvah coming up tonight to hear or to read the Megillah. So Rav Moshe Feinstein, in his book called Igrot Moshe, he says there's a big doubt. He says, it seems to me, this is in one of his Sheilot and Shuvot, it seems to me that in any event, someone who is reading the Megillah, he says you only hear them when they are actually reading. We're not talking about a recording here. Okay? I'm not talking about someone recorded it on YouTube and you're going to watch a YouTube of a recording of the Megillah. I'm talking about a live Megillah reading through a telephone or through Zoom or through FaceTime. So you're on Zoom. Is it exactly the same like Bikur Cholim, like going to visit the person? Not that we got to see the Megillah reader, his pain and suffering. Chas v'shalom, he should be healthy and read and be healthy. But there is a difference of being there live. But let's say you have children and they're too young and they're not vaccinated and you're afraid to go and get something, being around 100 people, and come back home and do something that could make people unhealthy. So let's not talk about laziness. Let's not talk about, what do I want to get in my car and drive to the shul? We're talking about a good reason. Perhaps you're immunocompromised. Perhaps you just aren't comfortable being around people that may be sick. What is the mitzvah? In the Gemara, there's an interesting concept about what constitutes a minyan, and this is the problem with Zoom. But I'm trying to live in this world, in the olam hazeh that we have right now. In the Gemara, it says that you have to see the people to be counted in a minyan. And it even goes a step further because it talks about a man who's standing outside the shul. We'll call it the shul, but it's the place, the Beit HaMidrash. And they're having a minyan going on. And he's looking through the window. He sees the minyan, so he opens his siddur and he's davening outside the window. It's a beautiful day. It's not cold. It's nice outside. I'm seeing the minyan. I'm looking at 10 people on the minyan. Do I count as being with the minyan? And the Gemara says it's better to be inside with them together. So now, when you hear me talking right now, it's not a recording. It could be a recording. You can go back later on today and go onto the Bet David website and hear me as a recording. But right now, this is live. So if I were to, whatever it is I'm going to do, this is live. You're seeing it in action at this time. Well, if I'm reading the Megillah, what is the mitzvah of the Megillah? What is the mitzvah of Havdalah? What is the mitzvah of a minyan? It's open to interpretation. I'll give you what Rav Moshe Feinstein says, but before I get there, I'll just tell you because I don't want to, you shouldn't have to wait to learn it. If you can't be there in person, it's okay to hear a Megillah reading on Zoom. Halachically. The same way that it's okay to hear Havdalah on Zoom. You don't need a minyan. If somebody's sick in a hospital and you can do the mitzvah and you know how to read a Megillah Esther, you can go there, stand by their bedside, and you can read the whole Megillah to them right there. You don't need a minyan to read Megillah Esther. You don't need a minyan for Havdalah. You can make Havdalah all by yourself. Now, I've said there's a distinction between davening in a minyan and davening not with a minyan. And I said, Zoom aside, I am seeing a great success in many of our minyanim. I see a great success in Friday. We struggled as a shul, as most conservative shuls were struggling in the last 3 or 4 years, on Friday nights in particular, with getting a nice minyan. You have to phone people. Hi, can you come to shul? Can we count on you? Will you be there? It's like the old days, and we'd be there standing with 9 people thinking, we hope to God another 10th person comes in the door. A man or a woman, somebody, a human body, so we can have a minyan on Friday night. And now I flip on Zoom, I'm in my house, and we have 50 people, 60 people, we've had 80 people, we've had 45 people. No problem. They flip on their screen. I'm seeing you. I actually am seeing you. And it's live. So I think that it would be nice if it counted. There are some people that do, but many people do not count Zoom as a minyan. But forget about a minyan. Megillat Esther, if you're allowed to hear it, the same as Havdalah, through the transmission live, not recorded, it doesn't count, but live, it counts. We're not saying it's better than hearing it in person, but you still fulfill the mitzvah to some degree. Because look at what Rav Avadia Yosef said earlier on. Remember? He said, I agree with Moshe Feinstein's opinion. You visit by telephone, you cannot fulfill the mitzvah entirely. Let's say that's true. He's not saying, well, you're fulfilling the mitzvah 97.843%, or you're only fulfilling the mitzvah 50%. They're not giving you a value of the number of whatever that quantitative, is that even a word, number is, to what is the value of the mitzvah that you're performing. Is it 1 brownie point in heaven? Is it 2 brownie points? Do you get 1 for Havdalah, 1 for Megillah reading, 1 for Shabbos candles, 2 for Shabbos candles, 3 if you say Shachri? You didn't say Shema, you lose a brownie, you said it, you get 2. I don't know. In the Olam Haba, we'll figure it out. We'll all be there together. We'll be having a discussion and we'll say, so what Rav Moshe Feinstein says is very interesting. And he was not a person who understood modern technology or electronics, and this is before Zoom. So we had telephones though. Imagine before telephones. He said, the simultaneity gives it the status as the same as the physical voice. So when you hear me, it's simultaneous. When Esther was reading Torah this morning, I heard her Torah reading. When somebody was davening this morning, I could respond with an amen, and you all heard the response. So there's a simultaneity about that. There's something about hearing the physical voice in that particular time. And then he says, think about it a moment, Rav Moshe says. How do we know about ordinary hearing? When the reader reads the Megillah, he creates something in the air. That's what he writes in his tshuva. Now, he was not, again, someone who understood sound waves. We can open up volumes of scientific literature on how sound waves travel. When I'm up north at that lake that I go to, and I clap my hands at night, it's interesting how long it takes to hear the clap echo across the lake. There's a delay. But when I hear someone across the lake talking, I can hear them talking. I might be hearing it 2 seconds later, but I do hear them talking. And when you hear that, it's in real time, but there's a delay in the sound waves, the same way as there's a delay in the sound waves. If I talk to you on Zoom, you might receive the transmission through the telephone or through the Zoom a second later. And he said it creates something in the air. Sound waves traveling through air. If we accept, Rav Moshe says, what science teaches us, there is a small gap in time between the production of sound and the hearing. In any event, the gap in time does not disqualify what you are listening to. Wow, that's maverick. That's Rav Moshe Feinstein saying that the gap of when you have the telephone to your ear and I'm singing Havdalah for my sick aunt in Israel who can't make Havdalah for herself because she'll light a candle and burn the house down, and I'm going to say it for her so she can hear the bracha, Hamavdil ben Kodesh Lechol, I love you, Auntie Sylvia, goodbye, and hang up. She heard Havdalah, and she could say Amen. Similarly, he says, if someone is speaking into a microphone, and the only reason you hear is through the amplification, and you don't hear the direct sound, the simultaneity is still there. Hearing the Megillah through a microphone and amplification system is called hearing. This makes perfect sense to me. And this is called halachic hearing. And people tell me that the sound produced by the loudspeaker or telephone receiver or headphones, and I'm going to go far and add in the word Zoom. He didn't say it because it didn't exist, but it's the same as a telephone. This is a different sound. I don't know why they say that. It's all halachically the same. Therefore, it's possible to accept the reading of the Megillah when the listeners hear only by loudspeaker. Perhaps the shul is very big, or the shul is overcrowded, and maybe you need a microphone so you can hear over all the noise of the children making all that noise. How are you going to hear the Megillah? It's not Shabbos. We don't read the Megillah on Shabbos. Maybe the sound has to pipe into other rooms because it's so full, the shul, that the people in the sisterhood hall have to hear it too. The women's hall. They have to hear it too. And because they have to hear it, we have to have the sound piped in through a loudspeaker. Or maybe that's good enough, he says. According to Rav Moshe, he says it's good enough. And he said, don't worry don't worry that people will make mistakes with other mitzvot. And then he says, because he makes this very clear, such as shofar. So when I blow the shofar in the sanctuary, I always stand to the right of where Rabbi Schein stands. I don't stand in front of the microphone. He stands in front of the microphone. I stand off to the side because you're not supposed to blow the shofar into an amplification system. It has to be a natural sound. So the Gemara goes through great lengths. It goes through miles of tshuvot of why we can't hear a shofar in an echo like a cave. You're not allowed to blow it across the lake and say, I heard it across the lake. That doesn't count for shofar hearing. You're supposed to be there to hear the shofar. Live sound. So we know that we don't have to worry that people are going to say, well, if you're allowing Zoom. So what he's really saying here is Megillah reading counts through Zoom, but shofar probably wouldn't count. Well, that's interesting. So he says Rosh Hashanah is a Yom Tov, and we shouldn't be using transmissions anyway on Yom Tov. He says similarly for Kriyat Torah, which requires a physical presence, he said you should be there. The reason they make all these fences around the rules is because they don't want to encourage us to do exactly what it is that we're doing. And I'll wrap it up. I have 2 minutes, but I want to tell you, they don't want to say, you know, Marshall, you don't need to live in Bathurst Manor or Shepherd and Wilson Heights. You can live in Sturgeon Falls on the lake. because you can Zoom with your community. I'll take a freezer full of kosher meat. I'll take it up north. I'll stock up. I don't need to be in shul for Rosh Hashanah. I'll Zoom it. I don't need to be in shul. I'll hear shofar. No, shofar doesn't count on Zoom. They're building a fence. They're saying shofar does not count on Zoom. You have to be live to hear it. But with Megillah Esther, it does count. Rav Moshe Feinstein says it counts through the transmission of a telephone, and therefore it would be the simultaneity that makes it real enough that it counts. So we have a leniency by a great Rav for Megillah Esther, for Bikur Cholim, and for Havdalah. And it will be interesting to see what the future holds. So I'll wish for all of you Chag Purim Sameach. I think we'll continue even after Purim about the ideas of the reading in Purim and then go on to other topics. But we'll finish up about it after you've experienced it. I hope that we'll be together in person, as many as possible. I hope that people that aren't comfortable, that can't be in person, will find joy and happiness in seeing the ones that they love and being part of it. Rochama has said many times, Zoom has been a lifesaver for all the Jews who've been able to connect, and she's 100% right. It's allowed us to connect. What a miracle it's been. Not ideal, it's not the same, but I just want to share with you something that I forgot to mention, and that was when I wrote to Rav Fink my idea on the bonus question, and I answered the question, and I got good. My idea was the thinking of, does it count as a whole mitzvah, or does it count as half a mitzvah, and what the percentage of the mitzvah is. My idea was this. A person breaks their right arm, and it's in a cast, and then they break their left arm, and it's in a cast. Both arms are in casts, and you can't use either one of your arms. The only thing you can put on for tefillin would be the rosh, the shel rosh. Should I put the shel rosh on and say a bracha just for the shel rosh? Or should I skip tefillin altogether and say, because I can't put the yad on, I won't put the rosh on? And I brought this forward with all of the sources. And I think it was something that I thought of as saying, do I get a half a brownie point? Do I get a half a mitzvah? Do I get a piece of a mitzvah? Is it the same as making that phone call because I at least put it on the rosh instead of bracha? I suppose it's better than not saying I'm going to put on any tefillin. So I think sometimes we have to do the best that we can do under the circumstances, but not give up entirely and say, this is my excuse for not participating in the full mitzvah if it's possible. Chag Purim Sameach to everyone, and eventually a Shabbat Shalom, and let's get together again next week and continue. I love this. Thank you.
Bye, guys.
So do we. So
Well
do
done.
we. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Marshall,
If you have a moment, I have a question.
Good, I'm here.
Okay, I finally got to John Vince yesterday, and I got the vanilla bean.
Oh, very good. Put it in
$9.98 for a tube of two. So anyway, my question is, I have the Absolute vodka. Do I use 2 beans and do I use a cup of vodka? I'm not really sure. I've looked in several places. So has Marvin.
2 beans for the whole bottle.
The small mason jar.
No, or just the bottle itself. But what you have to do is if it's a screw-on cap, put it right inside the bottle. But you know what you can do is slit the bean with a knife down the middle. Marvin will help you. Cut the bean down the middle from the top to the bottom, slit it, put it inside the bottle, and leave it there for 3 months, and you'll have the most delicious vanilla extract you've ever had.
And can you use the beans again? I bought 3 of these because I didn't know what to do.
No, you can't
Pick
use
the
it.
one. Okay, because Noreen said I could.
Yeah, you can.
See, Noreen? Okay.
You can, and you could try it and use it again, but I don't know. I think that the potency would kind of drain out of the vanilla, wouldn't it? I think if you want to get the best vanilla you can, try it. I'll tell you what you could do. You could add the old vanilla beans and add 1 new one.
Oh, that's good. Okay. I shall let you know how she goes. Thank you very much.
And they also say you can add vodka, more vodka to your compound as you use it.
That's right, but then you have to wait because it dilutes it. Then you're drinking your vanilla instead of. But let me make a
As long as it
suggestion.
has the vodka, we're in good shape.
I want you to know it works just as well with bourbon.
That looks like the
Yeah,
one.
you know, it says that it's a bourbon natural vanilla.
Similar.
The picture. That's the name.
It'll work with bourbon and it'll work with vanilla. By the way, you bought expensive vanilla. That you can buy cheaper vanilla in the back in the bins. They have bins that you can buy. You don't have to buy it in tubes. The one you
Oh.
bought was fancy vanilla. Use it. It'll be wonderful. But
I'm
you
sure.
bought fancy vanilla, and there's nothing wrong with that. Thank God.
Only the best, right?
the best for you, right?
Yeah. Thank you, Marshall. Thank you for the
Thank
class.
Thank
It's
you,
amazing.
thank you.
Fun.
Look
Of course,
forward to
yeah.
your cooking lesson.
Sameach, everyone.
We'll do it.
Chag Sameach.
Bye. Oh, see you tonight.
I'll see you tonight.
Yes, that's right. Bye, everybody. All the
Bye,
best.
everyone.
Bye.
Have a great day.
Me too.
Thanks, Marshall.